Europeans. A decade later, in the early 1970s, experimental trawl fisheries for Haplochromis were attempted as part of a broader economic industrialization strategy. Based on these surveys, Bruce Kinloch, who took credit for introducing the Nile perch, noted victoriously that the Nile perch now comprise more than 56% of the overall catch, a case of turning what my people, the Americans, called trash fish into a readily catchable and marketable product. The videos that we see here and on the next slide are from a recent video of a recent visit of university students from South Sudan to Uganda on the very same boat where much of the research in the 1970s was conducted. So from a development perspective, the results of test marketing efforts for trawl catches were reportedly discouraging. The lack of a market for large quantities of NKJ caught all at once signaled that these fish have never been particularly popular and have never constituted a significant fishery. Scientists found the results discouraging for a different reason, because it seemed that species of Haplochromis were disappearing almost as quickly as they were being identified. Here we see all small fish aggregated and measured collectively, regardless of the species. Only large fish, larger fin fish, are measured and assessed individually. These modes of encounter here, deploying trawl nets in the hopes of catching big fish, shape a version of reality where all small fish are simply disappointing trash. NKJ would continue to be the most abundant fish in Lake Victoria until the early 1980s. By the 1990s, development experts could say that these fish were historically insignificant and widely unpopular. These development experts were not necessarily wrong. NKJ were never all that important in the body of water still brought into being as Lake Victoria. The palates of Euro-American fisheries managers and development experts that are concerned with Lake Victoria were unable to account for the tastes and preferences of littoral residents and fish-eating publics who preferred NKJ for their small size, strong flavor, and longevity once dried. Nor could these methods of assessing and recording species, both the species composition and the economic value, nor were these able to enumerate vernacular values that did not easily align with these seemingly universal laws of supply and demand. So while NKJ were unpopular for managers and development experts, they were absolutely vital for historic residents of this region, and to a lesser degree are still important in contemporary Uganda, where residents still bring this body of water into being not as Lake Victoria, but rather as Nyanja, a body of water much more akin to a sea than a lake. If one is looking, it's not hard to find entrepreneurial women selling freshly fried NKJ on neighborhood streets in towns of sizes all along Uganda's littoral, where they still compose a delicious, nutritious, and affordable snack, a method for treating measles, and required elements in ritual events, marking social life and biological death. Although all of this activity would be almost impossible to see from the deck of a research vessel like this one. Still, much to my surprise, fish stalls along Uganda's littorals that I know for certain sell multiple species of fish, including NKJ, are now visible on Google Earth. Ooh, sorry, I meant to shift to, oh, I forgot to push the button. There we go. So we can't see these fish being sold from the decks of a big ship, but we can see them now in other forms through other technologies. So despite the continued importance of NKJ, and this is a form of NKJ pictured at the bottom, for littoral residents and Haplochromis for fishery scientists, managerial reckonings of these fish as historically unimportant trash continue to overshadow contemporary fisheries development policy and the writing of otherwise careful histories. Given the contemporary resurgence of haplochromis and NKJ, in the nets of fisheries biologists and in the nets of fish workers, it's time again to account for their past and their futures as composed of so much more than trash. So to wrap up and to be clear, the point of the project I'm sharing with you and the slice of it, again, that I shared, is not to argue for the radical alterity of fish workers or the radical incommensurability of the worlds they inhabit in relation to formally trained fisheries experts, development professionals, or concerned outsiders. Indeed, all of these different worlds are accessible enough to anyone willing and able to live their lives and do what other people do there in these contexts with an open mind. Instead, I'm writing against the singularity that has directed scholarly and popular attention to Nile, or Lake Victoria's Nile perch export fishery for far too long. In so doing, in this work, I'm following the lead of fish workers themselves. Fish workers know that the Lake Victoria Nile perch export industry motivates a managerial politics for Lake Victoria that is often at odds with their own aspirations towards eating and living well with multiple species of fish in and around the body of water they still bring into being as nyanja, as a sea. If Lake Victoria is indeed going to die, as the predictions I showed you in the beginning stated, nyanja will most certainly live on. So I will end it there. I must conclude by thanking a variety of people who have made this research possible, but I welcome your questions and comments here. And again, thank you for thinking with me about this work. Thank you. And your patience with my too much English. My abundant English.
¿Hay alguna pregunta, cuestión, comentario?
I have a question for you. Has anyone tasted the Nile perch or the Perca di Nilo?
Yes, I'm part of the tree.
It was fascinating for me to hear, so on one side, I'm trying to make a theoretical and conceptual argument about what's happening in this very complex situation. Because I see this idea of crisis reproduced over and over and over again. And the solutions posed to this crisis, to do things like promote food security and sustainability, the solutions that are proposed and implemented actually take fish away from people, they take away economic opportunities for men and women, but particularly women, in order to support a certain idea of what a sustainable fishery is. So it was fascinating to me to be with fish workers, and they will say, okay, these fish fillets of Nile perch, that's not fish for us. Some people won't want to eat fish that have ever even been on ice because it changes the flavor and the texture of the fish themselves. So yes, I'm making a sort of theoretical argument about what's going on here based on other kinds of academic work. But fish workers are also navigating these multiple ontologies in their own work and how they conceive of this. So that has been very fruitful and sort of productive for me to think with this. When I would go to field sites and then maybe return home to my university and started writing, return back again, I would constantly share what it was I was sort of coming up with in the writing work. And early on, this distinction between Lake Victoria and Nyanja, and there are other bodies of water also that are associated with more historical forms and ancestors and this kind of thing, Nyanja Naluvale. But anyway, I would say Okay, I'm starting to understand these as different bodies of water. You know, do you agree with me? Lake Victoria is something understood as above. It now exists to produce Nile perch for export. Nyanja seems to me to be much more like a sea, and we can understand it through multiple species that are processed and traded locally and regionally. And this other form, Nyanja Nambale, has much more to do with the longer sort of spiritual and ritual practices in this region. So I would outline this for fish workers and they'd say, you're absolutely right. That's how we conceive of these things as different things. So they're working between these different worlds. And so that provided a great deal of inspiration for me for this work. Taking them seriously in this, which is great.
There is a thing that was fun for me that because here in Spain there was more or less health crisis around the eating of meat at the end of the 90s because of the so-called mad cows.
Yes.
And then when it happened, people or in newspapers began to explain people how these cows were eating, and between the food stuff of this that those cows were eating was this kind of food stuff made by fish, by fish flour, you know?
Yes.
And it was, it struck people when they realized that, so it remembered me when you were explaining that in fisheries, fish is eating this kind of fishes, you know, this kind of fish, you know.
And the idea of cows eating fish seems,
Yeah, seems crazy.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, so the kinds of fish that are ground up to make fish meal to feed cows or do these other kinds of things, those are these sorts of trash forms. And I think I'm saying they're seen as trash once, both because if you catch them all at once, and the process is sort of a fermentation or preserving them, may give them a strong flavor, let's say. But they're not this sort of intensive method of catching them and transforming them into other things doesn't appreciate the individual sorts of variations in them, as well as other sorts of methods of dealing with it. Is there something similar in fisheries here about like a trash fish?
I have no idea.
Because
Probably.
Yeah. Now, at least in the US, what we're seeing is fish that were trash fish, because many of the good fish are now being fished out of existence. The trash fish are now the target fish. So sometimes it's the other kinds of fish. Say you're going for one kind and you catch other ones. Sometimes the trash fish is seen as bycatch from those kinds of things. But it doesn't mean it's not delicious and edible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is interesting too, is that here you can find in many places in the big commercial supermarkets a kind of fish, is frozen fish that you can identify as industrial fish, you
Yeah.
know. It is like a square fish fillets, you know. So, but it is not easy to know from what kind of fish this industrial frozen fish came. So, but all of them with the same shape, and so, and it is very competitive, and you know, I remember that it is very usual to find this kind of fish in UK at supermarkets, but even to here in a place where fish is very important in our traditions and in our diet too, you know. And usually I think that kind of fish used to come from this kind of fisheries.
Absolutely. And sometimes
What is it?
you won't even know what kind of fish it is. You also won't know where it was caught,
Sì,
where it came from even.
allora non siamo di principe come fanno.
Sì,
Entendemos
sì,
que
otros portos, otros
Sí.
pegados.
He comido otros.
no, es de ahí, pero ellos son considerados que comen.
Yeah.
Pero,
We are doing research about medical trash fish right now.
Oh, excellent! Research in the making. Ah.
I think all this subject is, well, I know about him because I have been talking to him for a long time, but we have not a deep knowledge on East Africa or all this. So all this is new for us, but also the theoretical approach is also, I think, quite new for us. So, and I think like these ideas about how knowledge is built in different ways and how the same object can be understood in different ways, and how that was built historically, and the consciousness of the alternative past that you have mentioned is very useful not only for studying this case but also any other thing. So maybe you can, is this approach like being used for study other kind of subjects, or can you tell us a little bit about the main threads in environmental anthropology?
Sure, yeah.
Are the connections about environmental history, or I don't know if it is the same or not, or this is more in the anthropological perspective and less in, I don't know, just feel.
Well, my take is to do good anthropological work, you also have to do historical work. The sort of classic mode of doing anthropology was, okay, you go there, but you have a chapter in your book that's the history chapter, but maybe it only goes 20 years, or 10, or focuses on specific things. But for me, it was really important to go back further, to understand these kinds of processes. So first I started to study illegal fishing, but I realized like you can't study illegal fishing without understanding how those laws came up and what sort of other transformations were there. Within environmental anthropology, there's been just as there are in other fields, sort of multiple forms of knowledge that was focusing on epistemology. So it's assuming that there's the same object that exists, but different groups of people know it differently. The move has then been to say that actually people know this. This is also a bottle of water. And they're looking at this. This is ridiculous, but okay. That multiple different people look at the same thing. I think that's the epistemological move. What I think interesting things that are happening now is that actually people know, and it's focusing on practice, how people actually do things, that people can have the same sort of tools for knowing worlds, but they interact with things differently to make it then multiple objects. It's not entirely a clear summary of this, but it's moving away by focusing on practices, how things are done, how realities are created through the material stuff and what we're doing with them, sort of makes them to be different things. So some of the earlier work in this thread has focused largely on Amerindians in the Amazon, so the work of Viveros de Castro and Eduardo Cohn and others have laid a lot of the groundwork for thinking of the existence of multiple ontologically distinct worlds. But even in that work, it's still reproducing some of the same kinds of things when we were thinking just with epistemology or knowledge, which is the indigenous think one thing, and the Westerners or European, whatever, think a different thing. In my work, I'm trying to say that it's not just, if we're thinking of the politics of knowledge, it's not just the indigenous or local versus the global and Western or Northern. But actually, these different worlds can be understood by anyone who's willing to engage with those worlds in the same kinds of way. So it's not just that Africans who live on the shore know one thing about this place, but rather, or Africans in general and Europeans know a different thing. But these other worlds become accessible. You go to school, you learn about fisheries management, you learn a particular way of understanding this place as a lake. And people who know it as a sea can also know it as a lake. An outsider like me can first understand it as a lake and then understand it as a sea. So it's not just indigenous knowledge versus global scientific knowledge, but these things are multiple. And I think for me, that's actually really exciting. And important. So it's not, I think the most interesting things happening in my field right now is that it's not just multiple knowledges, but actually multiple distinct sorts of objects, phenomenon, sort of ways of being in the world that can help us explain some differences. I also find it interesting to use that to think through politics in the United States, for example. I mean, there is one world where, there are multiple worlds there. There are worlds, I think about it in my own campus. You can engage with the same kind of place as a white person on a college campus and not experience racism. You can say, this doesn't exist here. But if you're a person of color, you're interacting with the world and people are interacting with you very differently. And you can say, there is an incredible problem with racism here. You can live in one part of a city or a country and think, oh, the economy's doing great, everything's wonderful. And you can live in another and think, oh my God, the end of the world is coming. And it's not that people who say the end of the world is coming or that everything is terrible are wrong, I think. They're just living in a set of situations where it's entirely possible that that's what's happening. So, so I think there are other kinds of extensions for this kind of thinking in other fields that are not even just environment, but how people make political choices, economic decisions. So it's not just we have some identity and that's how we know what exists, but it's how we're engaging with the world that sort of enacts sorts of realities. So beyond just social construction to actually how these kinds of worlds and things are made. I think that can help us explain a lot of different things that have happened. I mean, I'm still thinking through this myself, but hopefully eventually there will be a book. There will be a book. But it's always a challenge and works in progress. And it's great to be able to share some of this with you. Thank you for that. And I'd be happy to share some suggestions. I mean, if some of this approach is interesting to you, I'd be happy to share citations or whatever else. The book I stated in the beginning by Anne-Marie Mol is actually about medical practice in the Netherlands and this disease, atherosclerosis, which is the sort of hardening and plaque in the arteries. And this book is amazing. In it, she's tracking how this disease, that atherosclerosis hangs together as the same thing, but it's actually a different thing for patients who experience it, as well as doctors who are diagnosing it with patients in the clinic, as well as sort of lab technicians who are actually engaging with sort of pieces of the body that have this stuff. So, but it all hangs together also through these other kinds of ways. So that was a big inspiration for me for thinking, for being able to think about this in the sort of way that I do. Yeah, you're welcome.
¿Algún comentario más, pregunta, cuestión? ¿Damos por escuchado?
Sí, eres
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we can stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we can, I'm happy to talk more
Yeah.
informally as well.
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.